What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT, joined by my guy, College Football with Sam. We got Sam the man. It's been a long time no talk, my dude, and we definitely got a lot of catching up to do because the off season is about to end. But you've been drinking something special this off season, Sam. You've been drinking that blue and white Penn State Kool-Aid. You got Penn State going 16-0, winning the national championship over Texas and Clemson. If the Penn State Kool-Aid is tasting that good, Sam, you might have to give me a little sip, man, because what is it about Penn State that has you this fully bought in?
It is the fact that they have the best coordinator duo in recent memory. They got Kotelnicki on offense, and they got Knowles on defense. It is the fact that they have potentially round one, pick one in Drew Allar. Now, that's just potential, but the fact they even are in that conversation at quarterback is pretty incredible. They have the best running back duo in the nation, and only Notre Dame can say that. It's them and Notre Dame. I don't think anyone else, at least preseason-wise, can say that. It's the same on the offensive line, except Penn State returns more than Notre Dame. Does anyone else who's watching this know that Penn State has 70% of their offensive line made up of 4 and 5 stars? That is 20 percentage points higher than Oregon, 30 percentage points higher than Ohio State. It is way higher than Michigan. They blow the conference out of the water in O-line recruiting. It's also way higher than like even Texas's O-line blue chip ratio, which I kind of found is strange, but that's beside the point. This offense is going to be loaded. The defensive line, it isn't as deep as Clemson or maybe Georgia or Texas in terms of like talent, but that starting 4, I think, could be number 1 in America. And then they got A.J. Harris, who I think is going to be elite early 2026 round 1 pick by NFL draft projections. And their special teams should be better because they bring everyone back. They have 14 of their 22 starters as seniors, and everything else I just mentioned in a workable schedule. I just think it's perfect to pick them to win it all.
You see, I want to sip the Penn State Kool-Aid with you, Sam, and I can see a world where Penn State runs the table because this probably, would you agree, is the best Penn State team that they've had since they last won a national championship, which was like, what, 81?
Yeah. I mean, they had that 1994 team that was undefeated, and that probably should have won it, but because of how the old college football rules work, just is what it is. I don't know enough about the Joe Pa teams to say if this team is better than like 05 or some of those teams, but it should be the best by a mile that Franklin's ever had. Like, they don't have Saquon Barkley, for example, but Saquon had to deal with mediocre O-lines. This O-line is huge. It's deep. They have 3 tackles right now who I can confidently say will be playing in the NFL one day. No one has that type of O-line depth. Yeah. This should be the year.
My whole issue is Penn State just has to overcome James Franklin's big game demons. Anytime he gets into these big games against Ohio State, which the last 8 matchups, they've lost by less than 1 possession. Well, at least 4 out of the last 8 losses that they've had to OSU have come in 1 possession games. Then they lost to Oregon. And I felt like last season was the easiest path that Penn State was ever going to have to a national championship. Home opener in the playoffs against SMU. You luck up and you get to play Boise State, which we already knew was an automatic win. Then you lose in heartbreaking fashion to Notre Dame, which most people pick Penn State to win that game. So what's different about why James Franklin is finally going to be able to get rid of these big game demons this year outside of the talent? What has he changed from a philosophical standpoint to finally get over this barrier that has held down this program?
Well, I think you have to go back to the coordinators and as much as I'd hate it, and you probably hate it too, understandably so, the talent, because I'm not in James Franklin's head. So I'm treating it like he hasn't changed philosophically outside of what he's done in terms of coaching hires. But he brought in Jim Knowles, and Jim Knowles gifted Ryan Day his best defenses outside of 2019 when he had Jeff Hafley. And Jim Knowles is probably the best defensive mind currently in football who's a DC. And then you got Kotelnicki in year 2. And Penn State last year was top 10 in yards per play, top 15 in points per play. They were 5th in offensive efficiency per ESPN's FPI. Like, impressive numbers. But the reason they scored about the same amount as the prior year is they had no wide receivers. I mean, Michigan with J.J. McCarthy, every year they had him probably had better receivers, even the year where Ronnie Bell was hurt. And they never had great elite receivers. I mean, I think the encouraging thing, if you are looking for Penn State to win it all, is the fact that if they had Brandon Inniss or Carnell Tate as their wide receiver 1, or they had Malcolm Simmons as their wide receiver 1, they probably split the Oregon and Ohio State game. Oregon just had their number on defense, so I don't know if the extra production on offense would have mattered, but they certainly would have beaten Notre Dame, maybe would have beaten Ohio State in the regular season. And now you're talking about a team that, instead of being unable to complete a forward pass to a wide receiver against Notre Dame, may have either A, won it all, or B, you lose to Ohio State in the rematch and you're the number 2 team in America and it's still kind of a successful year. That is what's different, is they have senior leadership. They have almost a 70% blue chip ratio, which wouldn't matter all that much, except you have that combined with seniority, a deep offensive line, the nation's best defensive coordinator and best offensive coordinator. And a fun fact about this Penn State staff is the only defensive coordinator to prevent Kotelnicki from scoring an offensive touchdown against his defense is Jim Knowles. And now they get to work together and plan together and strategize. And Kotelnicki especially can probably learn from Knowles, like, hey, what was I doing wrong? That's where I'm at with Penn State. Is Franklin is, yes, a dud. He is a negative in big games. However, a lot of that at times is due to the fact that he has inferior talent, which circles back to him. That's his fault. This year, with how much teams at the top lose and how much Penn State brings back in the upgrades they make, there's a chance they might be the best roster on the field in every game they play, depending on how everything pans out. And at that point, well, Franklin should win most of his games because he's great at beating the teams that he has a better roster than.
You almost have me wanting to take a sip of that Penn State Kool-Aid, Sam. It's like the way you're selling it sounds good. It really does. And I'm kind of 70% there with you. It's just more so I've never felt there's been a better quarterback head coach tandem than James Franklin and Drew Allar, because they both have the same perception about each other from the eyes of the public. They're both overrated. But if everything does go right, I do see a world where they go 16-0, because you got to have a good amount of production to win a national championship, as we've seen with Michigan and Ohio State these last couple of years. So the Kool-Aid sounds nice. It's just I just got to go with Texas, man. I just think that this is the year that Sark and with the Golden Boy, Mr. Nepotism, Arch Manning, they're going to be able to get it done. But I feel you with Penn State. I feel a lot higher after talking to you now about Penn State than what I was before. So it's just more so I got to wait and see. But, Sam, you're a Michigan fan. And prior to Michigan just completely taking over this rivalry, this was a one-sided affair. Ohio State was winning 8 straight games. In the last 16 matchups, they won 15 of them. Then all of a sudden, 4 years ago, Michigan just starts kicking their ass, and now Michigan has mentally broken Ohio State. How did we get to this point? What transpired that made the tables turn in Michigan's favor to now it's just like every time they go up against Ohio State, they just find a way to break this team even further. Ohio State spent $20 million on last year's team. That was the best team money could borrow before the season, Sam. Me and you sat right here at this time last year, and we kind of found it unfathomable that Ohio State could possibly lose 4 straight, and now we're back at it again asking, could they lose 5 straight now? What has happened?
Well, of course they could lose 5 straight. I mean, last year was probably the biggest advantage Ohio State would ever have over Michigan. And even you could even argue mentally it would be. Michigan entered that game with 5 losses. They weren't going to play for anything. Anything. They were never reaching the playoffs, even if they like won that game by 1 billion points. No one was ever going to pick them like to go because they had 5 losses entering it. And Ohio State, you know, you're 10-1, and you need this game to play in the Big Ten championship game. You need it to get a guaranteed home game, and you need it for pride's sake because Michigan has been, after every time they've beaten you, they've basically told you like either passive aggressively or straight up that you're soft, which isn't correct, but is also insulting, and you just need to change that. Well, Michigan beat Ohio State. The reason this all started is because Ohio State decided to not hire an NFL defensive coordinator, and Michigan did. Now, it was an NFL assistant, Mike Macdonald, but Michigan hired Macdonald, and Ohio State retained Kerry Coombs. That's where all of this has really started, where Ryan Day is naturally more of a, schemer, in-game tactician, loves to call plays, wants to be on his side of the ball, and is kind of I don't know. He's a really, really smart guy, but he also strikes me as like a guy with, more normal characteristics than maybe his predecessor. Like Meyer was just, I don't want to get too into it, but you can probably see like the positives with what he did at Florida and then the negatives in the NFL where it was just revealed that, yeah, might be pretty scummy. Well, Harbaugh is kind of, I think, like that in a certain sense. Obviously, everyone knows about the whole, cheating and the Stallion stuff. But what Harbaugh had over Day was CEO and experience and a little bit more connections. So he upgrades the defense, and Day kind of lets the defense slide for maybe a year more than he should have. Michigan then, with proper weather conditions and more importantly, having a better college offensive line and being able to use their running backs better, well, they beat Ohio State by double digits. And the problem with what Ohio State did in response to that really made this the mental game that it now is they ever since, it feels like they have formed their entire identity around trying to make sure that that just doesn't happen again on one hand. And then the other hand, it's like they don't really, it's so weird. They either over prioritize it or completely downplay it, and there's no balance. So what Day does after 2021 is he decides we're going to run the football more, and we're going to try and prioritize O-line, and we're going to get a really good DC. He got an elite DC in Knowles, but they have never been super productive at running the football. Even last year when they had perhaps the best running back duo in the last decade or something close to it, they were not good at running the football. Michigan mentally broke Ohio State because they have played into what has historically dictated the game. And then they tell Ohio State that if you want to beat us, which Ohio State desperately does, then you have to play our game. Michigan pivoted towards being this team that wins ugly through ball control, doesn't have skilled receivers, doesn't really care about wide receivers until this year. We just want to be big, we want to be powerful, and we want to physically kick your rear. Ohio State wants to make you vomit after running track with them. Now, that works fantastically for a playoff sense, but it didn't work against Michigan. And then what made it even worse is that last year, you could tell that Ohio State cared by the energy of their players and by the game they called. They wanted to prove to Michigan that they were just better than Michigan and that they could do anything Michigan could do, but better. That's why they lost. And that's why Michigan has really gotten in Ohio State's head. And that's why I'm someone who's picked Ohio State to win 3 out of the past 4 matchups, because they were either the better team, I thought Michigan didn't have it mentally in them, or Ohio State was at home. And I don't usually pick Ohio State to lose at home unless it's to a team that I think is definitively better than they are, which is rare because Day runs an elite operation. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but
No, that was some great stuff, man. I was absorbing it all in because it makes a lot of sense. Because last year, you had the sense that Ohio State got away from who they truly were against Michigan. As you said, they wanted to prove a point. You want to try to bully us? We're Ohio State. We invested $20 million into this team. There's no way you think you're finna just kick us around like we're some nobodies. You guys have no quarterback. You're going into this game as a 3-touchdown underdog with your hands tied behind your back because you've been playing musical chairs at the quarterback position. We are about to embarrass you. We are about to splatter you. And you can just feel after the first quarter, Ohio State really got tight. And then after the game, when they started getting into it with the flag plan, you could just tell that Ohio State was so emotionally invested. And when they didn't get that outcome, that's when I knew that this is a mentally broken football team. Because look what that loss did to Ohio State. In the sense, losing that game was the best thing that could have happened to Ohio State because we saw them go on one of the most dominant playoff runs in recent history. I'm talking about splatter Tennessee, which was expected. But then they have a splattering that none of us saw coming and completely painted the Rose Bowl in the blood of the million uniform colors that Oregon has. And then they proceed to beat Texas in what was a competitive game, and ultimately they beat Notre Dame pretty handily in the national championship. So this year, Ryan Day still has to win this game. But now I feel I don't even know who I'm going to pick. I might just stay away from the game because you picked Ohio State 3 out of the last 4 years, Sam. I picked them for 4 straight years in a row and have gotten burned every single year. And now why I'm a little bit more convinced that Michigan might win this year is because last year Michigan didn't spend $20 million on their team. Michigan wasn't investing as much into recruiting and in the transfer portal like Ohio State was. Now Michigan has caught up. Dave Portnoy is putting in money to Michigan. All of these big time donors that they have. Essentially, that win for Michigan completely changed the perception on Sharon Moore, because before that game, there were a lot of question marks around Sharon Moore. Then all of a sudden, he wins that game, and everybody has a different feel about him now. All of a sudden, you carry that momentum into that bowl game where you dragged Alabama, embarrassed Jalen Milroe, and now we enter the 5th straight year where we could still see Michigan win this game. And if Ohio State does lose 5 straight, even if they win the national championship again somehow, how could Ohio State fans, how can Ohio State donors and alumni just swallow that?
They can't. Well, it depends. If Michigan, because I don't think the questions about Moore have been quite answered. My opinion of Moore, of course, changed a little positively after that game, but not much. I still don't think he's a great coach. That game forever changed my opinion of Ryan Day because Nick Saban never loses that game. Kirby Smart never loses that game. So if you, that game told me, unless Day wins 2 or 3 natties in a row, I'm never viewing him like Saban. That's what that game told me, which, look, is okay. Nick Saban is the only Nick Saban. I'm just saying that Day won't be the greatest coach of all time. That's a big deal to some Ohio State fans, but if Day is there for 30 years and wins 3 titles, it's a tremendous success because winning a title's that hard. If Michigan's good again this year, Michigan should win again because Michigan has, I think, 5 or 6 playable defensive tackles that are 300 pounds or more, and most of them are seniors. Ohio State has like 1 or 2, and they're not seniors. Like just the gap, the gap between Michigan's D line and Ohio State's O line or D line is, in terms of depth, it's a chasm. And then you look at the O line, where Ohio State's tried to catch up, but the units aren't really like they're not that different. And Ohio State doesn't have any more 5 stars on their O line. Michigan has 2. So Michigan now, like, they have home field advantage again. They have a greater matchup on the lines of scrimmage, I think, than they did in either 23, where I thought Ohio State almost entirely closed the gap, and 24 as well, where the gap was, again, it actually should have been in Ohio State's favor. They disappointed in a way that I couldn't even expect last year. I think that I'm going to be very careful in saying this. Whenever you're playing a rival on the road in a program like Michigan, where over just the past 4 years they've won a title, they've won the Big Ten, you can kind of get away with that from my perspective. However, there's also the standpoint that Ohio State right now is no longer the unanimous number 1 recruiting program in the Big Ten. Like Oregon, I think, is past them. USC is trying to. Michigan is trying to. I think that if you're Ohio State, you don't want to play with losing. You don't want to play with losing to Michigan or Penn State next year. I mean, especially Michigan, because Michigan isn't as good as Penn State or Texas. Like Texas and Penn State could be viewed as generational teams depending on how they do this year. Michigan's not going to be viewed that way. I mean, Michigan's best outcome is going like undefeated regular season, winning the Big Ten, and then in the quarterfinal they lose by 30 points to Penn State or Texas or Clemson. That's their best outcome. So if they lose 5 in a row, I don't know what to tell you. And I think at the same time that there's an argument to say, well, Ohio State can win because they finally mentally broke through in the playoff. I can hit back with the fact that Day is always coached like a madman, except everyone but Michigan. And that's because Ohio State fans will rake you over coals if you don't beat Michigan by 50.
Yeah, man. I remember when they, after that loss to Michigan one time, didn't they go toe to toe with Georgia and it came down to a missed field goal that decided that game?
Yeah, and 2022 Georgia was significantly better than everyone else in last year's field except for Ohio State. Like if they like we that's exactly my point. They did this against Georgia before, and then the following year, to be fair, Day didn't call a bad game in 23. He called a good game, but they still lost. Like it's not the playoffs are different from the regular season. They're more important than the regular season in the current format. Just because of the, we're not in the BCS anymore, but the regular season's more important because you have to win there to get to the playoffs. So it's interesting. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, man.
Still think Ohio State's going to be a better program than Michigan over the next 5 years, though. I still think that.
Absolutely. Everybody, this is Sam the Man, College Football Sam, the best YouTube channel on this platform when it comes to covering college football from every angle, every conference. Make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to him. We will have the link in the comment section below. Make sure that you subscribe to us if you new and hit that like button as well, unless you want your quarterback of your favorite team to play like Anthony Richardson, which I don't think any of us want that to happen. So go ahead, smash that like button and subscribe, or your favorite team's quarterback will play like Anthony Richardson. Tony Petitti is stepping on the SEC's neck, Sam. He said that if the SEC wants to meet our playoff demands or wants us to be in their favor of their preferred playoff format, they got to play 9 conference games. Why is that 9th conference game so big for the Big Ten that they want the SEC to have it?
I have no idea. I mean, I would prefer it just so that everyone's playing the same amount of conference games. But the SEC usually schedules Power 4 out of conference opponents to compensate for that at a rate that the Big Ten just doesn't. I don't get it. I don't get it. I think that the 16-team playoff with minimal auto bids is the best way to move the sport forward. And then what you do is you just try and make a rule with the new enforcement arm that within the next 5 years I think will exist, that just maybe 5-10, I don't know, that will just say, hey, like you got to play one or two Power 4 at a conference teams from the other conferences. You just have to, in addition to your 9 games. I don't get the fuss. I hate the auto bids. I just don't get it, because what
Me
they
too.
do, they make the non-conference completely useless if it's all done by, play-in games in, championship week. Then the non-con is useless. It'll be like NFL preseason games, except the college football season is 50% shorter. I don't want that. It sucks.
And how much do you feel the Big Ten is starting to close the gap on the SEC? Because I've always felt like the SEC was better than the Big Ten. Although the Big Ten has won the last 2 national titles, the difference is that the Big Ten has 4 elite programs: Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Oregon, and then it kind of is a log jam of a really good middle of the pack squads. When the SEC is a little bit more deeper: Georgia, Texas, Bama, Tennessee, even though, on a good year, they're elite. LSU. The SEC is always one of those conferences where it's just so much quality teams that it's easy to kind of get them mixed up. But now it seems as if NIL has kind of catapulted the Big Ten to now being in a dangerous territory where they can end up topping the SEC and just completely run away with the title as the best power conference in this sport.
Yeah, I think that the Big Ten right now is better at the top, and I think they're continuing to run away with it at the top. But I think the SEC in the middle and the bottom is better. So, for example, this year with Penn State, I think Penn State's seven points or more better than everyone. I think it'll be that way at the end of the year. So what'll happen from my perspective is, like, if Penn State plays Georgia or Texas at the end of the year, even though I think Sark and Smart are better coaches than Franklin, I think what would happen is that at the end of the day, Penn State would pull away in the fourth quarter. I just think they're going to be that good. I think that Ohio State and Oregon would play as in my mind, the 2 and 3. I think they're pretty interchangeable in the Big Ten. They would play the 1 and 2 in the SEC very competitively. And I think that Oregon and Ohio State, if you still think athleticism matters a ton, especially in the track meets that are the playoffs, they might have a higher ceiling than Georgia. They might. I think they have a much lower floor too, but you get the point. Like Alabama, I don't think Alabama is as good as Oregon or Ohio State right now. I don't. I think Indiana doesn't have a lot of talent, but I think Indiana would coach circles around a lot of the SEC teams, and they're a little bit bigger and beefier in the trenches and overall than they were last year. But the cutoff from the top third of the Big Ten, or at least maybe the half mark in the Big Ten versus the half mark of the SEC, the median SEC team is like Florida or Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Median Big Ten team is Illinois.
Ooh, yeah.
Who would win that? Like, would Florida's 300-pound average defensive line and offensive line really lose to an Illinois O-line that gave up over 30 sacks and a D-line that has 3 men down and none of them are over 300 pounds?
No,
Like,
absolutely.
no.
And Illinois doesn't have nobody who can stop with Caleb Banks.
Exactly. And then, do you really think that Altmaier's going to be better than Lagway if Lagway's healthy?
Oh, absolutely not. But I will give Luke Altmaier this. If they had the Most Improved Player of the Year award, he definitely should have won it, because last year I was incredibly impressed. But yeah, and that's just the thing. From the top, yeah, I would agree that the Big Ten is better than the top of the SEC. And then the middle, you have more beef in the middle. And even I won't say the worst team, because Mississippi State and Kentucky, I don't think they will pretty much beat anybody. I don't even know if they could beat Northwestern. But yeah, it just feels like the SEC doesn't have this stronghold over college football as what Greg Sankey tries to make us believe that they have. And speaking of the SEC, I want to transition to the southern part of the country. Texas, to me, has the perfect team entering this season. I don't think that they have any weaknesses. They have depth all over the place. We should expect that Arch Manning plays at a really high level. Steve Sarkisian is a capable coach. It's just he's yet to break through. But as good as what Texas has the ability to be, Kirby Smart still feels like he's going to be the kryptonite to this team. Just like how Alabama is his kryptonite. For some reason, when Steve Sarkisian plays against Georgia, he just gets tight. It seems like he kind of gets lost at times because one thing about Georgia, when they play Texas, they get after it. I'm talking about they're sending everybody at the quarterback. They threw a lot of exotic looks at you, and they're really aggressive. And Georgia's offense was stuck in the mud against Texas, and they still won that game. And they did it on the road in Austin, of all places, with a down squad. And then in the SEC championship, you're probably thinking, nah, with a team as talented as Texas, no way they're going to lose to Georgia twice. And Georgia still beats them. So does Texas have the ability to really win this conference, beating Georgia in the process? Or ultimately, would Georgia be the downfall of Texas being able to take home the SEC crown this year?
I think something that plays into Georgia's hands is the fact that Georgia has 2 de facto coordinators. So, Mike Bobo calls the offense, and Glenn Schumann, I'm pretty sure that Glenn Schumann calls the defense. Let me fact check myself here.
Either him or Muschamp.
Yeah, and Muschamp right now. Oh, yep, he has been calling plays for the Georgia defense. Okay, just making sure, because Smart, I view Smart and Knowles as like the top 2 defensive minds in football. Like Smart's a savant, so wouldn't shock me if he were calling plays at times. But I thought it was Schumann. Anyway, Sark is the de facto OC, along with being the head coach, and Pete Kwiatkowski is the defensive coordinator. So Sark's mind is to be spread out more than Kirby's does, and also more than Georgia's coordinators do. Like, he's taken on a lot more. And Kirby is no doubt the better game manager. Like, just when watching him versus Sark manage games is incredible. Like, Kirby Smart last year, the only game where they really got physically destroyed was Ole Miss.
Yeah.
That was it. Every other team, they physically, at the end of the day, were either, winning or gaining momentum. The problem was against Notre Dame. They lost the turnover battle and had a backup QB. And against Alabama, Beck turned it over, I think, like 4 times. So you can't have that. I think that Texas is the better roster right now. I think Texas is the better recruiting program. And I think Texas's assistant staff might be a tad bit better. But at that point, you're within margin of error. Like, Georgia could have the better assistant staff. The problem is Georgia has the far better head coach. No one is better at managing games and at preparing for games than Kirby Smart. No one is. Absolutely no one. The fact that they went 2-1 in games where Carson Beck had 3 turnovers or more, where he threw 3 interceptions. They went 2-1 in those games. One was Texas on the road, one was Florida neutral field, and the other, the loss was Alabama, where they lost by a possession. They didn't even get blown out, even though initially it looked like it. I think that Georgia will be a thorn in anyone's side that they play. So if they got past Notre Dame, I think they would have beaten Penn State the way Notre Dame did, where Penn State's clearly this better team, but Georgia's just hanging in there, and then boom. And given how Ohio State played against Notre Dame, who's to say that Kirby Smart in Georgia wouldn't have, maybe found a way to exploit that O-line a little bit more, because their D-line was better than Georgia's, and they get Ryan Day to overthink the game. Just Smart is an absolute menace, and how you beat him is you're either Nick Saban or you have a really critical matchup advantage roster to roster. Because you will never have the head coach versus head coach game planning. That will never happen. I mean, even last year when it looked like Freeman got the best of Smart on that special teams play, They just didn't call the false start.
Yeah.
Like Notre Dame's wide receiver fell back before
Look of the
Georgia.
Irish, as they want to say.
Yeah, it just you'll never have the coaching edge. So Texas is on the right path to potentially overcome that because they, I think, are at a point where they're recruiting better, and I think they're developing rather well. I mean, they're the only team over the past 2 seasons to put double-digit draft picks in. They just reload. They're the closest thing, I think, from a talent perspective. They're the closest thing to the old Bama teams. They're not even close. They're not, but I don't think anyone
In
is.
terms of the size, the sheer athleticism, the kind of depth, it's like when you see Texas walking out the tunnel, it's like, oh snap, this is Texas. Oh, okay, yeah, they're definitely back, all right.
Yeah. And you know why they can do that? You know why they can stack that much talent? Because, and you probably are like thinking in your head, oh, he's going to talk about the Lamborghinis and the NIL.
Oil
Well,
money.
of course I am. Yeah, the oil money. They can pay high schoolers stupid amounts because they're paying everyone on their roster stupid amounts. Like Georgia can't do that. Alabama can't do that. Ohio State can't do
And
that.
you want to know what
Like,
I noticed? I didn't mean to cut you off. On
no, you're
three-poster
good.
graphic of college football's biggest spenders, Georgia and Alabama were not on the list. Texas and Texas Tech were like the top 2 or top 3. And eventually, we know that Steve Sarkisian is a good coach. And we know that Texas is a talented team. And eventually, it'll get to a point where you kind of will be able to see it. It's only so much that coaching can make up for it, because they always say in college football, it's not always about the X's and the O's. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes.
Yeah, I think here's what I think. If they meet up 3 times, Sark will win the 3rd game because Texas is deeper and they're older and their schedule is easier. So they won't suffer the same amount of injuries. They'll gain more and more experience as the year goes on. They're returning a running back in CJ Baxter from injury. And Manning is younger than Stockton and also has a way higher ceiling. So the longer they play, the more that Manning will separate from Stockton.
And I think Arch will handle Kirby Smart's defense a lot better than what Quinn Ewers did, because Ewers was kind of paranoid against that front.
Well, Ewers had no pocket presence. Nope. I mean, that was the difference between Ohio State and Texas. Like Texas, even in that game on the lines of scrimmage, was bigger and better than Ohio State, at least O-line wise. I think Ohio State had the better starting D-line at least. But Howard had eyes in the back of his head, so he could just dodge anyone. I mean, against Michigan, he got pressured almost 30 times and didn't take a sack. Ewers, every time he gets pressured, he takes a sack. And Manning could be that because he got pressured a ton and didn't handle it well last year. But if he just is able to gain football IQ, he should be able to handle it better because of the, higher ceiling, the fact that, he has some of the best, training him in his family. And if he can't handle it well, he has mobility. So maybe you can, run him more and give the rushing offense a second or third option instead of what Texas had last year, where with the banged up running back room and a quarterback with a leg injury, whenever they ran the ball, kind of everyone knew it was coming and they struggled to run it.
Exactly why they couldn't punch it in against Ohio State in the red zone, and they had that scoop and score by Jack Sawyer. Now, Alabama, right? 70% I feel of the folks out there that follow this sport believe that Kalen DeBoer is still good enough to maintain Alabama's prestige in a sense. Because anytime I hear somebody who plays Alabama, rather it's Tommy Castellanos at FSU or Diego Pavia, despite Nick Saban being gone, Alabama is still viewed as everybody's regular season national championship game. But outside of that context, though, there are some weaknesses that people point out with the NIL that I still don't really quite understand how Alabama has NIL struggles when they still are bringing in top 3 classes every year. But from a talent standpoint, entering this season, Alabama to me is a top 5 team. They have a loaded offense, one of the best receiving cores in the nation. They got a really good offensive line with 3 NFL guys, one of those being Caden Proctor, who will be a top 15 pick next year. And they're just completely loaded on defense. At linebacker, they're loaded. They may have the best secondary in college football. I really have a hard time seeing Alabama fall off with how good of a coach Kalen DeBoer is. Because what doesn't get talked about a bunch is how this guy is 2-0 against Sark, Dan Lanning. He's been Kirby Smart. He is the ultimate big game coach. If you had to bet money on somebody other than Kirby Smart to beat any of the elite coaches in this game, Kalen DeBoer is definitely the dude that you want. And I feel that Alabama isn't being considered enough in that national championship mix with what he was able to do at Washington. I think he does a great job of getting the most out of his roster, despite, last year not going that well. But he had a bunch of freshmen that played really well. Ryan Williams also had a true freshman at corner that was playing really well. I can't see Alabama falling off. I think they get back into the playoffs this year, but I want to know, like, what's your feel for Alabama this season and the future of this program under DeBoer?
My feel for this season actually just changed while you were recording this. So I was thinking it over, and I actually, while you were talking about it and mentioning what you were, I actually just quickly texted a friend who I've been going back and forth with Alabama about at certain points, about how, like, for whatever reason, it just clicked to me that they should be better than last year. And if they aren't, then this may not work. So I think that DeBoer is an elite coach. And I think when it comes to game management, the only coach who's better than him is probably Kirby Smart. So game management wise, second best. I don't think that he's quite like where Day is at CEO. So that's why I would have Day ahead of him overall. I think Day knows more about hirings, firings, running a big time program than DeBoer does. But it's so interesting where I don't like their assistant staff, but I love DeBoer. And by assistants, I mean assistants. I actually like their coordinators. So coordinators, head coach, the three-headed monster that matters the most, I love. Assistants, not so much. But they also have the talent to where assistant coaching is only going to do so much for them. Where assistant coaching may determine whether or not they win at all, but whether they win 10 or 11 games, they probably have that in the bag most years than not. I am concerned about Ty Simpson. I think their O-line in terms of potential is insane, but I think it's a little, just a little overvalued. It should still be pretty good, though. What I love about this Bama team that you mentioned, I'm glad you brought up, is the defense. This should be a top 10 defense at worst, and it could be one inside the top 5. They have seniors everywhere, and where they don't have seniors, they have talented, typically former top 100 players who have been developed well and who got playing time last year. So they're vets, even though they're young. And you look at their schedule too, and I don't think Florida State's beating them. I mean, I'll be rooting for Florida State to beat them, but I don't think Florida State will.
Florida State, man, they think it's David versus Goliath. They don't got enough stones to take down Alabama this year.
Oh, Florida State's dead. Florida State as a program's dead for the next 5 years. I mean, I'll laugh with you because your reaction's funny, and it is funny.
Deion
it's
Sanders
stupid.
is on the way.
They're dead. I mean, the fact that they're trying to lock down their players in a contract where they can just extend them and not give them raises is proof that they're desperate. I mean, they're desperate. They can't. They're too poor to buy out their head coach's money, who went 2-10 and who couldn't beat Memphis and who couldn't beat Boston College. I don't know how anyone could think that this is anything other than the end of the road. And you're just trying to, you're like a car and you've floored the stop sign, you floored the dead end sign, you're in the ditch and you're trying to rev yourself out of it. It doesn't make sense. I'm not high on Brian Kelly, for example, but I can see a world where they make the playoffs and they win a playoff game and he redeems his career at LSU. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but Florida State's dead. Like,
Yeah.
if Alabama doesn't beat them, that's not because Florida State's alive. I don't think that's because Alabama has some serious issues.
Yeah. Playing down the competition.
Wisconsin, for
Yeah.
example, I think may have a path to beat them, but I don't think they will. And then, Georgia on the road's tough. South Carolina on the road's tough. Auburn on the road is tough. Maybe even Missouri will be. But I don't think they're going to overlook Vanderbilt. They should destroy Tennessee. They should beat LSU, Oklahoma, obviously Eastern Illinois. And with their road games, they should win. They should split them. They should win half of their road conference games. I think 10-2, maybe 11-1 is how it'll play out. I think given DeBoer's track record of, really playing to his competition, showing up in the big games, kind of sleeping a little bit against the smaller teams, I do think they'll lose a game. And my views on the assistant staff also help that opinion. But entering this video, I would have told you I think that this year is going to be another down year, even though I like DeBoer long term. I don't think that'll be the case this year. I think that maybe it'll be a down year relative to the Saban years, but their odds of reaching the playoff, I think, are higher than not. The schedule just isn't tough enough to knock them down to 9-3 this year, I think.
And I believe Ty Simpson can't be no worse than what Jalen Milroe was at times, because the guy was just struggling to complete the forward pass. He was just spamming it to Ryan Williams all game, it seemed. And also, I feel Kalen DeBoer was a little bit lost with the play calling. Yeah, Sheridan, who was calling the plays. That was the first time ever he didn't have his tag team partner, Ryan Grubb, who was with the Seahawks. Now you bring him back. And I'm high on Ty Simpson more so because he has a lot of characteristics to Mac Jones. And with the supporting cast that Mac Jones had, that was part of the reason why he had the most prolific season for Alabama quarterback ever. And I feel Ty Simpson, with the receiving core that he's throwing to Alabama, wanting to be more committed to running the football, especially with Jan Miller, really underrated back. I feel he can be good enough because the last three national championship winners didn't have elite quarterback play. You had Will Howard, who was pretty good, but it's like, like he isn't Stroud or Justin Fields. Then the season before that, you had the handoff merchant, J.J. McCarthy. Despite being a first-round pick, he had first-round traits, but he didn't have first-round caliber production at Michigan. And then, of course, we can't forget about the man, the myth, the legend, the mailman, Sir Stetson Bennett. So nobody sees, at least me and you don't see Alabama falling off. But Oklahoma, I feel there's a lot of folks that are sleeping on the Sooners this year. I know you're not that high on Oklahoma, but when I see Oklahoma, I see a team that was trying to win games like they were Iowa last year. All defense, special teams, and just no offense at all. And their season was over before it even started. Nobody talks about this, but Oklahoma went in a week one down the majority of their starters on the offensive line, which was already a question mark, down several key contributors at wide receiver. So there wasn't really too much that Jackson Arnold, Michael Hawkins could work with. And then it didn't help that Jackson Arnold was out there giving out turnovers to the point where you thought that Vegas had paid him off and whatnot. Maybe he needs to get investigated for how that Tennessee game went. But Brent Venables, to his credit, fixed the two biggest issues that held this team back: Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer as a package deal. There's some questions about how good is John Mateer actually going to be with the step up in competition, but when you follow your offensive coordinator, you normally end up being pretty successful, especially with the step up in talent, which he didn't have when Washington State was outmatched against better competition. Overall, with how good that Oklahoma defense will be, I'm confident that Oklahoma's offense will be above average, and that will be good enough for them to possibly be a 9-win team, and they could be vying with Florida to be a 3-loss SEC team that possibly gets a playoff spot.
Yeah, I think what Oklahoma, I liked the Iowa analogy because it was perfect. I think that Oklahoma this year will continue that tradition, but in the way that Iowa did last year, where they got way better offensively. I think that Oklahoma will be a more talented version of last year's Iowa. So a little bit better on defense, a little bit better on offense. And Mateer, Mateer will be the starter for the whole year, so you won't be playing quarterback roulette like Iowa was last year. So that will help a ton. The reason I'm not as high in Oklahoma as some people are is that just the O line was so bad, and it's not like they have like they haven't quite yet. I just intuitively have recruited at either this phenomenal level or brought in new pieces to completely fix it. I think it'll be better, but will it be great? I don't know. A question I have about Mateer is his supporting cast will be a huge step up from what he had at Washington State, but the defenses he will be playing are an even greater step up than his supporting cast is. So statistically, he should, saying should so that no one bonks me over the head if I'm wrong, he should be worse statistically. Like an upgrade over Arnold for sure, but statistically, he should not put up the same numbers that he did at Washington State because his opposing athletes are bigger, faster, harder hitting. The DBs will have better twitchiness and, awareness of the field, eyes in the back of their head. His receivers will be better. His O-line will be better. At least I would hope. I mean, certainly would hope so. I like the addition of Jaden Ott, but that ultimately depends on the O-line. Like in a big game, if the O-line isn't good, Ott will be like Singleton and Allen were at Penn State in 2022, where against the big games, it's like, nope, you can't do anything because your O-line can't block for you. The defense I love. The offense is just good enough to where I think that, like you said, they could go 9-3. I think the Michigan game determines everything. There's a good chance that they beat Michigan and maybe make that ugly. There's also a good chance that Michigan goes in there and does to Oklahoma what they did to Wisconsin in 2021. And they just kind of like pull their shirt over Oklahoma and just bloody them up into looking like a grape. If that happens, Venables is done.
Yeah,
because then there's no way they're
defensive-minded coach losing to a true freshman, especially at home.
Well, even more importantly, for Michigan to do that, like the Wisconsin analogy I said, it wouldn't be that Oklahoma's offense would be bad or the defense would be bad. The offense would just completely melt down and give Michigan a bunch of turnovers, and they'd slowly pull away. And with that, the question would be, how are you going to survive October and November? Like, I think genuinely, if they don't go 8-4, Venables is gone. That's kind of my read on this.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. I feel like Oklahoma, they can wake a lot of people up though. I don't think they will be like a doormat like how they were last year. And even then, I feel that Alabama win was definitely one that was admirable. It was one that they desperately needed, that showed that, yeah, we can compete with the best. You feel me? You can't sleep on us. Don't treat us like we're Mississippi State and Kentucky. 3-4 years ago, it looked like Clemson was down and out. It felt like Dabo Swinney was just so outdated, so stubborn, to where his stubbornness was going to hold Clemson back from ever being back in national title contention. But all of a sudden, Clemson wins the ACC championship in one of the most craziest ways possible. And then they actually give Texas a really good fight in the first round. And then after that game, Dabo Swinney wasn't dejected. Like, he just had a big grin on his face. And he knew that Clemson was on the doorstep of something greater. And that's the team that they have this year, which is right back in the thick of things to win it all. And Clemson's resurrection back to national title contention has to be one of the biggest storylines entering this season, because as much as everybody is trying to sing Clemson's praises, let's not try to act like after when they lost to Louisville, we weren't all saying that they were done as far as ever being back as an elite program. And all of a sudden, he pulls off the most shocking move of the offseason. He steals Tom Allen from Penn State. I don't know if you saw that one coming. I didn't see that one coming. Then, on top of that, he finally starts using the transfer portal. Sam, Will Help from Purdue was one of the few bright spots on that team last season. He gets a really good receiver from the FCS level, and Clemson is lock and loaded this year. Cade Klubnik, arguably the best quarterback that's proven entering this season. Loaded receivers, loaded on defense with 2 potential top 10 picks on the defensive line. This Clemson team looks like one of those vintage Clemson squads that we saw Dabo Swinney win 2 national championships with. So I got Clemson making it to the national championship game.
I have Clemson doing very well in the regular season because their schedule's manageable and their starters are better than anyone they're going to realistically play. So, for example, let's say they face off against Miami in the ACC championship game. I think Miami's future is much brighter because they've recruited and I think developed at a higher level than Clemson has. They have right now. Right now, they are running circles around Clemson in recruiting, like over the past 3-4 cycles. But that's not right now. You know, Clemson is older. They, I think, have the 3 best wide receivers in the ACC's best quarterback, one of the ACC's best offensive lines. They have the ACC's best defensive line, the ACC's best corner room, one of their better special teams units, I think. So when I look at Clemson, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that I don't know if I agree with you about them definitely being in the national title game. I kind of have them falling out either quarterfinal or semifinal because I think that there are other teams that are better coached than they are. And I think their talent, like people talk about how, you know, they're more talented than Penn State or they're more, you know, talented than some of these other teams. I don't think that's the case when you factor in development. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. They're there though. They're
They are
there.
very young though. They had a bunch of guys who stepped up that were really good as true freshmen, but I could understand that. Maybe Penn
They're young
State.
at certain positions, but they're very old too, and that helps. Like their young players are awesome. They have a lot of awesome old guys. I do think Klubnik's the number 1 wide receiver. I think that this team is as close to a lock as you can get to win the ACC. Not quite there because you have Georgia Tech or Miami who could cause chaos. The question is what they do in the playoffs. Like I think no matter what, they'll probably win 12 games. But I think 12 games with the roster you bring back and the outlook you have would be a failure. I think you have to go to the national title game and at least compete there, if not win the whole thing. I think that Penn State and Clemson this year are both national title or bust teams.
Yeah. And I would agree with that because I'm looking at their coaching staff. Garrett Riley more than likely should be a head coach next year. Tom Allen, he'll probably be around the block for a while. I think that's one of the best coordinator duos in the nation. So, I mean, if everything goes right for Clemson, I could definitely see this being a year where they win it all. But I could also see them coming up short. You brought up Miami being a potential chaos team. And you know I'm a diehard Hurricanes fan, but I'm having a hard time sipping the Miami Hurricanes Kool-Aid this year. Mario Cristobal put a lot of money into improving Miami's biggest bugaboo last year, which was the secondary. Snapped 4 of the top 20 DBs out of the transfer portal, including a guy in Jacoby Thomas in the spring cycle who has started a good amount of action for the Vols. And really, when you look at Miami outside of you know, maybe some concerns you got about Carson Beck, I think that he'll be pretty good. I've seen Carson Beck actually play in person when my high school team went against him. Yeah, like we were up 21-0. Then after the first quarter, the dude just completely became like Tom Brady in high school. And I've seen Mac Jones play my freshman year at high school, and Carson Beck was way better than him. I felt like I was watching an NFL quarterback before my eyes, and I hate how he gets scapegoated for a bunch of issues at Georgia that more so were due to the other pieces around him not being up to par. Yeah, he has some turnover issues, but Shannon Dawson is one of the brightest offensive minds in the nation. And he has one of the best offensive lines, too, of Mario Cristobal specializing in that area. But that's the thing, though. I like the talent that Miami has. My concern is the coaching going to hurt Miami again? Because anytime you got to hire an assistant to help you manage the clock, I just don't know how much I can trust you. And I'm picking Miami to beat Notre Dame week 1. I know Miami can win the big games, but can they avoid the upset losses like what we saw them have to Honda McCord and Syracuse and Georgia Tech last year? That's where my pessimism for this team lies. Do you think that Miami can finally trust Mario Cristobal? Can he get this team to a level that they haven't been in 22 years, winning back-to-back double-digit game, well, having back-to-back double-digit winning seasons and possibly winning their first ever ACC title?
I think that Miami will, I don't know if they'll be better than last year in a potential sense because that offense was crazy, but they'll be a more balanced team. And I think that that will help stability and that will help them in a quest to reach the college football playoff. When I look at Miami, I see a team that has the number one offensive tackle in Francis Mauigoa, that could have the number one D end in Ruben Bain Jr., that has a corner trio, if you include nickel, at Xavier Lucas, OJ Frederique, and Charles Brantley, that could be the best in the ACC. I like the pickup of Muhammad Toure at linebacker. And then I love what they have at running back. I mean, when I look at this team, it reminds me as a Michigan fan of like those 21 or 22 Michigan teams. Like obviously not 23, but where this team can, they have a talented QB, good enough receivers, a really good O-line, a deep running back room, and then enough players on defense to be really good there. I think that you should expect this team to reach the playoffs. If you're a Miami fan, you should. If they miss it again, it's a failure for sure. Because the schedule, while harder, if you lose to, like, let's say you lose to both Miami, you lose to both Florida and Notre Dame. Well, if you then reach the ACC championship game, even if you have a third loss, you go 10-3, but win the ACC, you get in. I'd call that a success. And I think right now in week one, Miami will be better than Notre Dame. Florida, I think Florida matches up better with Miami, even though I think Notre Dame's better just because Notre Dame's unknown at QB. They have a staff change, a huge downgrade, I think, at DC, and Florida has, continuity and then those trenches and DJ Lagway that just, I would not want to play that if I were anyone, but they have the best outlook in the ACC. I think that based on recruiting and development trends, they should rule the ACC after this Clemson team, just based on how they've recruited and how they've developed, the fact that Cristobal's willing to hire and fire people when he needs to. And yeah, they're just going to keep building and building. And this year, it would shock me a little bit, just a little bit, but it actually wouldn't surprise me all that much if they ended up being better than Clemson. Because I think Miami last year, if they played against Texas, for example, would have performed at about the same level. And while Clemson brings a lot of guys back, Miami now has in their depth chart the probably a similar quality athlete, if not better. And I think Corey Heatherman's a better DC than Tom Allen, for example. I don't think Allen did the greatest job managing that Penn State defense. And I think Heatherman did as good as anyone could have with that Minnesota unit.
Yeah, that Minnesota defense was carrying Minnesota the majority of the season. And realistically, I got Miami going 9-3. My own fan base is turning against me because they think that I'm too low on Cristobal. But I'd rather be surprised than disappointed this year. Everybody, this is College Football with Sam. Make sure you guys go ahead and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Link down in the description below. If you don't, your favorite team's quarterback is going to play like Anthony Richardson. And before we get you up on out of here, there's one last thing I want to touch on you about because, listen, the future of Notre Dame football under Marcus Freeman has never been brighter right now. I mean, they are becoming an absolute juggernaut with him. Marcus Freeman has Notre Dame on steroids right now with the way they're recruiting, with how well they played last season. I was really impressed with how he just completely turned around the season after that Northern Illinois loss. Yes, Notre Dame fans, we got to bring that loss up. Not to really demean you, but because when Notre Dame lost that game, everybody just completely was laughing at Notre Dame, felt that they never were going to be anything better than maybe a 9-10 win team. And all of a sudden, Marcus Freeman within the span of one playoff run has flipped the perception of this Notre Dame program. Notre Dame used to be one of those teams that if you were a team in the SEC or the Big Ten, you put them on their schedule, they more so were a resume builder. You knew you weren't going to lose to them, but they would be a good enough team where they would help build up your resume. Now, when you schedule Notre Dame can actually punch you in the mouth and beat you handily. And yeah, you can nitpick with how the refs kind of handed them that win over Georgia, but I felt like they fought pretty hard against Ohio State. They were more competitive in that game than what the box score may indicate. And I feel with what Marcus Freeman is doing from a recruiting standpoint, Notre Dame could very well find themselves winning a national championship with him if he doesn't leave, which I don't think he will, because it seems like their donor base and their alumni is more bought into him. Because everything Brian Kelly claimed he never got at Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman seems to be making the most of.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there is a good chance that I think there is a great chance that they win a title under him. Now, I don't know if that'll happen soon or if it'll have to happen in, the next decade. Um, it's interesting. My opinion of them just for this year is that they're going to regress by a good chunk. And then in 2026, they're going to be really, really good and probably have Freeman's best team. My issue with them, for example, like last year, was the fact they were even capable of losing to NIU was pretty damning. And then they won a close game against Georgia, a close game against Penn State. USC was a close win. It just was. Indiana was a blowout for sure. Yeah. But, Ohio State blew them out too in the same month where they lost to Michigan. And then a few weeks before that, they looked like crap against Nebraska. So I'm saying that as someone who's high on Indiana. So it's so interesting, losing to Marshall and then NIU tells me, okay, this probably isn't a fluke. Like they're going to be up and down and probably need a wake up call here and there to keep things afloat, which is so fascinating. I mean, I think they're going to be successful. He's recruiting well. He does a good job, I think, of knowing what he isn't good at and trying to correct for that. But this is also going to be his first time without Al Golden as his defensive coordinator. What's that look like? And they're having a pretty drastic change at the QB position. Instead of going for a portal guy, they're trusting their own development with CJ Carr, who's coming off of an injury. Likely. That's what it sounds like. So, I mean, in regards to Freeman's future, I would have to say I think of it positively. I don't know if they'll be one of the 5 best programs in America, though. I mean, even this recruiting class, where they're recruiting at a high level, USC and Georgia have similar quality recruiting classes, but they have some more players. Alabama, LSU, and Oregon, and I would say Texas have better quality players. And I don't think, Notre Dame quite has the coaching staff of, Georgia, Texas. I would even say the same with Oregon or Ohio State or Penn State. But they've leveled up from where Brian Kelly is. And I think that matters a lot because Kelly had them close and Freeman got them back to the championship game with a roster that was banged up. And it's like what you said, they did a good job fighting. So they try. The players love him, and not because he doesn't discipline them, because they want him to win. And that's really good, and that will get you a lot of places. Like, they have the effort. I think they have the buy-in with NIL and their donors. The question is, can they just push a few more things into a higher place than where they have them? And if they can do that, then they'll win a national championship. I think.
How you
Yeah.
feeling about the receivers? Because normally Notre Dame's receivers have always been what I felt has held them back. They aren't really known for receivers. The receivers have really kind of changed in a sense. They're a little bit more dynamic, at least what they're bringing in this season and what they have coming in the future with the recent commitment of Larry Fitzgerald's son. So I feel like Marcus Freeman with this kind of change in the identity of Notre Dame also.
Yes. I mean, I think that Greathouse and Fields are going to be really good this year. I don't think it will be this top 5 receiver core, but it will be the best that Notre Dame's had in a bit. And I think again with how they're recruiting and with some of the assistant coaches they have, they're definitely a top 10 program, if not better than that, over the next 5-10 years and potentially beyond that, depending on how long Freeman stays.
Everybody, this is my guy, Sam the Man. College Football with Sam, best college football YouTube channel on the platform. Go ahead, subscribe to him. Make sure you check out his podcast as well. This brother grinds out college football like I've never seen anybody else do. So go ahead, subscribe, check out his content, subscribe to my podcast as well. Subscribe to the channel. If not, your team's starting quarterback is going to play like Anthony Richardson, and nobody wants that to happen.
Hey, they're going to play like Davis Warren. Oh, no. They're going to play like Alex Orji.
No, they're going to play like Spencer Petras.
Like, no. I can go even worse. They're going to play like Deacon Hill.
You're awful. You're awful.
They're going to be like a cheeseburger in the middle of the field. Just can't do anything.
Man, go ahead and subscribe, man. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in.